Chapter 4, Ancient Egypt and Kush. Section 2, Life in Ancient Egypt. As Egyptian civilization grew more complex, people became skilled artisans and other specializations like making pottery, mats, furniture, clothing, houses, and temples. Here's an example of Egyptian pottery right here. We expand the picture. You see how ornate it is. Some Egyptians traveled up the Nile to trade with other Africans. Now, when we say they travel up the Nile, we have to remember which direction the Nile River is going. So when I say up the Nile, it's going this way up the river. So it starts down here and goes upward. Now, of course, they're not going to travel where the cataracts are because those are waterfalls and it's going to be hard to transfer around them. But some people got around that by digging little canals around the cataracts in order to get around them. Egypt also created a government that divided the empire into 42 provinces. Remember, a province is sort of like a state, and the Egyptians had an army. In Egyptian society, the priests held the highest jobs, following formal rituals and taking care of the temples. The priests and kings held special ceremonies to please the gods. Again, in society, slaves were at the bottom. Most slaves were captured during war. And the slaves worked on public building projects like pyramids, or worked in the mines and quarries, or were domestic servants. So let's look at this pyramid here. This pyramid kind of shows us the social class system in ancient Egypt. At the top, you have the pharaoh. He's number one. Right below them are the priests and nobles, followed by the traders, artisans, shopkeepers, and scribes. At the fourth level are the farmers and the herders, and then, of course, at the bottom of the barrel, even though this says unskilled workers, that essentially meant the slaves. Women in Egyptian society had fairly equal rights to men. They could own property, they could have a job. That's a little unusual for our ancient times. Children played with toys and had physical games. These are all examples of toys that you would have found with Egyptian boys and girls. The most favorite pet of Egyptians were the cat. I cannot believe that. Cats are awful. They're evil. But cats were the most favorite pet. Around 3000 BC, Egyptians will develop a writing system using something called hieroglyphs. Now, if you're looking at the picture, the hieroglyphs are very similar to cuneiform. It's a picture. The pictures will then stand for symbol or words, and then eventually those words will translate into sounds. So this is an example of hieroglyphics. Now, instead of using the clay tablets like the Sumerians did, the Egyptians will develop a paper-like material called papyrus. It was from a reed, this reed right here that you see on the picture. You take the reed and you weave it together to form an early form of paper, which you see right here. The Egyptians will also develop some of the first geometry because property lines had to be remeasured after floods, and shapes were used to design temples and monuments. And as you saw in a video that we watched, the pyramids here were kind of aligned with stars, so there's a little bit of astronomy with that too. But you had to use geometry to create the form of the pyramid. Egyptians studied the stars in the sky and their reoccurrence to determine when a flood may happen. So that helped them to create an early calendar. They would know when the flood seasons would happen based on which stars showed up. And what we're talking about here are the constellations. Hopefully you know what a constellation is, but it's kind of a pattern in the sky that forms a picture. So they kind of knew when a season was about to happen when those particular stars showed up in the sky. The Egyptians were really good with anatomy. Anatomy is the study of the human body. They knew the parts of the body really well due to preparing bodies for burial. And we'll talk more about that in the future. But the Egyptians performed surgeries and they created ways to heal wounds. They performed surgeries mainly when they were preparing the bodies for burial. For example, organs would have to be removed from the body. So that's one of the ways they learned how to do surgery. Egyptians believed in the afterlife. The afterlife is a life believed to follow death. Bodies of the dead were embalmed or preserved, and the organs except the heart were removed and placed in jars. So embalming back then was a little bit different than embalming today, but the whole process is still similar in the sense that you're preserving the body for burial. So they use certain ointments and oils to preserve the body, and then they removed the organs. All the organs were removed with the exception of the heart. You'll need the heart for your next life. And those body organs will be placed in jars that look like this. You open them up, you put the organ in it, and you put the jar in there, and then you bury it with the person. Even the brain was removed, and one way the brain was removed by the nose. So you stick an instrument up the nose, and then you start to wiggle the brain out. It kind of comes out like spaghetti. Wiggle it out of your nose, place it in a jar, shove it in the tomb. The body was then dried, and it became a mummy when it was wrapped in linens. Again, the linens were treated with some kind of ointments and oils to preserve the body. Tombs held everyday objects that the person may need in the afterlife. So here's an example of a object. This is a throne that was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. We'll talk about him later. But that was one particular object, but he was buried with mainly all his possessions so that he can use them in the afterlife. Here's a picture of the jars where you put the organs in. The Egyptians believed in polytheism. Remember, that's the belief in many gods. And here are some examples. There's lots more, but these are some examples of Egyptian gods and goddesses. You have Ra, which is the sun god. The sun god here. You will always notice him. Sometimes he has the falcon head, but you always see the solar disk on top that represents the sun on top of the head. That's the sun god Re. This is Osiris. He's always kind of green in look. He is the god of the afterlife, or the after-death god. He judges the Egyptians, whether you had a good life or a bad life. This is Isis. She is the fertility goddess. Sometimes you will see that red disc with these little pointy things on the side. Sometimes you'll see her with wings on as well. And this is Anubis, the god of the dead. He kind of guards over the bodies once they've been placed in the tomb. That is the end of section 2.